Hi, and welcome back to the last week of our Loved Small Group series, and we hope that it's really been a great journey for you as we've just delved a little bit deeper into this amazing, just really earth-changing reality that we are loved by God. And so this last week we looked at John chapter 21, which is one of my favorite passages in Scripture because I think it just so beautifully sums up the whole of the gospel message, our humanity, God's grace, His restoration, His redemption, and then our commissioning and our calling. And that really is the essence of love. It's all like wrapped up there in a nutshell. We are very imperfect and we fail, and yet we are redeemed, and then we are sent out.
Yeah, so we went through chapter 21, but we started at the kind of the beginning of the little process that Jesus takes Peter through. You know, Peter denies Jesus 3 times. Just before he's crucified, and then the cock crows. We know the story where Jesus almost, he does prophetically declare that Peter's going to deny him 3 times.
And also, actually, what's interesting about that is in chapter 18 of John, you'll read, Peter says he's like gung-ho at that moment. He has no self-insight into his own character, and he's like, I will come with you. I'm all for it. He chops off the soldier's ear. Like, he has no self-awareness of how frail he actually is.
Yeah. So he has this bravado mentality, and then he's almost humbled when he betrays Jesus 3 times, and the prophetic word comes true, and then he kind of goes back to what he knows. Jesus is dead, and he kind of gives up on the calling that God has placed on his heart, and he goes back to the family trait. He goes back to the calling that he previously had of just being a fisherman, and he kind of gives up on everything and goes back to what he knows. And Jesus meets him on the shore, kind of the first time he appears to Peter, and he standing on the shore, and he calls to Peter and he says, Peter, have you caught anything? And Peter says, nope, we haven't caught anything, not knowing who's standing on the shore. And Jesus shouts to him, throw your nets on the other side. And there's this prophetic, this reinstating of his prophetic word over his life that says, no, there's a higher calling. There's a new calling that I placed on your life and that you forgot. And they catch 153 fish, and Peter realizes who Jesus is and who's standing on the shore. And that's where we kind of pick up on the scripture when they get to the shore and Jesus kind of jumps out the boat and runs to the shore. And that's kind of where we pick up our piece in John 21.
And it's such a beautiful story of redemption that Jesus restores Peter with those 3 denials. He asks 3 times, do you love me? And the thing about all of it for me is that I suppose our fundamental emotion when we mess up and when we fail is shame. And so we tend to withdraw ourselves. And so often that's our response. When we mess up, we withdraw from God. But Peter, in all his brashness and his craziness, as soon as he's like, it's Jesus on the shore, he lurches himself out of the boat and swims to shore. And I always wonder how long it took the boat to get there. And, you know, he's sort of standing there wet and bedraggled. And then the other guys get out of the boat and they're like, what was that about, Peter? You know, but he just couldn't wait to get to Jesus. And I wonder what he said to him when he got there. But he came back. And that really is the story of redemption, is that there is always redemption if we are willing to come back. Throughout Scripture, we see that Jesus says, or even earlier in the Old Testament, God says to His people, "Come back, turn your hearts back toward me." He is always turned toward us. There's nothing that makes Him turn away, but we have to do the turning back and the coming back and that wanting to reconnect with Him, and then there is redemption.
Yeah, it's kind of like a common theme throughout Scripture. You know, you've got the prodigal son, you've got Peter, you've got Paul who turns away, you know, he's blinded and then he sees the light and he kind of comes back to his senses and he realizes that he's been persecuting the church. You know, there's this common theme of people turning around, realizing where true love is, and what the destiny of love actually is, and turning to Jesus as the answer to that question of what is love, where do we find love, what do I do with my life, what is my life meaning, and all of that. We find that in Jesus, and when people come to that realization, love redefines them, and they have a new destiny in love. So it's a common theme throughout the scriptures that we see.
And then that whole conversation about, do you love me? We spoke about the Greek words that are used in that passage on Sunday, but Jesus first asks Peter, do you agape me? Do you love me with that unfailing love of God? And Peter's like, no, Lord, I phileo you, but I can't actually agape you. And Peter's come to realization of how broken and frail his human ability to love really is. And yet Jesus still calls him. He still says, feed my lambs. And so for me, it's this picture of him saying, I know, Peter, that your love is not perfect, but bring me what you have. Bring me what you have in your heart and in your hand, and I will use it to change the world. And we know that Peter did change the world. We're lucky that we know the end of the story and how that all went, and how he, in fact, gave up his life as a martyr for the sake of the gospel.
And it kind of calls us to the same thing. It kind of, the story leads to, okay, what is the destiny of love in your life, and how are we going to feed God's sheep, and how are we going to engage like Jesus engaged? How are we going to impact every life around us? The gospel message is not, oh, I received it, I can now live a life where I can do what I want, or I know the gospel, so it's okay. But it's actually sharing the gospel. It's in allowing others around us to experience the gospel, to hear the gospel message, and that it changes us. Peter got persecuted and killed for his faith, but it was kind of a process Jesus took him on, and he calls us to that same process. He says we have to engage. We can't say, okay, I'm saved, I'm going to heaven, never mind everybody else around us. We have to be willing to engage in the gospel truth and share that gospel truth.
And the beautiful thing for me about Peter's story is that I'm sure as he ministered to people, maybe who felt that they had failed and fallen short and, all been there, he could relate, and he could say, no, you don't understand. I know what it's like to betray Jesus to his face, to deny him, and yet there is redemption. And so that whole failure and all of that became a part of his story, became a part of his witness. And it becomes part of ours too if we let God use it, if we come back to him. There is always restoration, and there is new commissioning to do what he has called us to do.
So our prayer for you with this love series that we've done and we're concluding today is that love has redefined for you what your life is all about. Like it did for Peter. It doesn't matter if we fail. It doesn't matter if we deny. If we come back and we return to the gospel truth, if we return to the feet of Jesus, ultimate love, we can change the world.